Emma was just another college student on Flight 892, quietly reading her aviation textbooks. When the captain suddenly collapsed and dangerous storms appeared ahead, the crew made a desperate announcement: "We've lost the pilot and need help immediately. If anyone can help fly this plane, we need you now." Nobody knew the quiet student in row 14B was about to save all 156 lives aboard. Before you watch full story, comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. The morning sun streamed through the massive windows of Denver International Airport as hundreds of passengers moved through the busy terminal. The spring break travel season was in full swing, with families heading to warm destinations and college students eager to escape another Colorado winter. Flight 892 to Miami was completely booked, reflecting the high demand for flights to Florida during this time of year. Among the travelers waiting at Gate B23 stood Emma Rodriguez, a 20-year-old college junior who looked exactly like what she was, a university student heading somewhere for spring break. Her worn jeans, comfortable sneakers, and faded Colorado State University sweatshirt marked her as just another young person in the crowd. Her backpack was stuffed with heavy textbooks, and her laptop bag contained the tools of modern student life: chargers, notebooks, pens, and energy drinks. But Emma's sweatshirt told a more specific story for those who bothered to read it carefully. Instead of just Colorado State University, it read Colorado State Aviation Program, in smaller letters beneath the school name. Most people didn't notice this detail, and those who did often assumed it was just another college program that sounded more impressive than it actually was. Emma had arrived at the airport 2 hours early, a habit she had developed from her flight training where punctuality and preparation were essential. She used the extra time to review her aircraft systems textbook, specifically the chapters on Boeing 737 operations and emergency procedures. Other students her age might spend airport waiting time on social media or video games, but Emma was passionate about aviation and used every spare moment to learn more about flying. As passengers began boarding Flight 892, Emma found herself behind a well-dressed businessman in his 50s who was talking loudly on his phone about some important merger deal. When he noticed Emma struggling slightly with her heavy carry-on bag, he ended his call and turned to help her. "Here, let me get that for you," he said with the kind of smile adults give to young people they assume need assistance. "What do you have in there, rocks?" "Just textbooks," Emma replied as they moved down the jet bridge toward the aircraft. "Textbooks for spring break? You should be packing sunscreen and swimsuits, not studying," the businessman chuckled. "What's your major?" "Aviation science and aerospace engineering," Emma answered, finding her seat in row 14B. The businessman raised his eyebrows as he helped lift her bag into the overhead compartment. "Flying planes in the classroom, huh? That sounds exciting. Very different from actually flying these big jets, of course. I fly about 200,000 miles a year for business, so I know how complex these operations are. Takes years of real-world experience after college to actually become a commercial pilot." Emma nodded politely, not mentioning that she already had her private pilot license or that she had logged over 340 hours of actual flight time. She had learned that most adults, especially successful business people, assumed that anything college students learned was purely theoretical with no practical application. The woman taking the window seat was Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a high school principal returning from an education conference in Denver. She was the type of adult who genuinely cared about young people but often spoke to them in a way that revealed her assumptions about their capabilities and experience. "Aviation science, how wonderful," Dr. Mitchell said as she settled in. "Are you planning to be a flight attendant? It's such a great career for young women: travel, meeting people, good benefits." "Actually, I want to be a commercial airline pilot," Emma replied, pulling out her thick textbook on aircraft systems and emergency procedures. Dr. Mitchell smiled in the way adults do when they think a young person has unrealistic dreams. "Well, that's certainly ambitious. Though I imagine it takes many, many years of training after college to actually fly planes this big. These Boeing jets are incredibly complex machines, so different from those little training planes they probably let you practice in." "The principles are actually very similar," Emma said quietly. "The systems are more complex, but the basic concepts of flight, navigation, and emergency procedures apply to all aircraft." Dr. Mitchell patted Emma's arm in a motherly way. "Of course, dear. I'm sure your classes are very thorough. It's just that real-world experience is so different from textbook learning, isn't it? But you have plenty of time to work your way up through the industry." Emma had heard variations of this conversation hundreds of times. Adults saw her age and made automatic assumptions about her knowledge and capabilities. They didn't know that her university's aviation program was one of the most respected in the country, with graduates working for major airlines around the world. They didn't know that she had already passed the written exam for her commercial pilot license or that she regularly flew complex cross-country routes as part of her training. Most importantly, they didn't know that Emma had spent countless hours in Boeing 737 flight simulators, learning every system and practicing emergency scenarios that most commercial pilots only encountered once or twice in their entire careers. Her university used 737 simulators specifically because the aircraft was so common in commercial aviation, and students needed to understand its operations to be competitive in the job market. As the boarding process continued, Emma watched the flight attendants perform their pre-flight duties with professional efficiency. She recognized some of the safety procedures they were following and could identify the aircraft systems they were checking. Her trained eye noticed details that other passengers missed: the way the lead flight attendant tested the intercom system, how the crew checked emergency equipment locations, and the systematic approach they used to ensure everything was ready for departure. The businessman, whose name she learned was Robert Chen when he introduced himself, continued making conversation as more passengers found their seats. "You know, Emma, I've been flying commercially for over 20 years, and I can tell you that these pilots are incredibly skilled. They train for years and years to handle these massive aircraft. It's not like driving a car or even flying those little hobby planes." "Actually, Mr. Chin, the training progression is quite systematic," Emma replied respectfully. "Student pilots start with single-engine aircraft to learn basic flight principles, then advance to more complex aircraft as they build experience and knowledge. The fundamental skills transfer between aircraft types, even though the systems become more sophisticated." Robert nodded indulgently. "I'm sure that's what they teach you in school. But when you're actually responsible for 150 passengers in a multi-million-dollar aircraft, it's a completely different level of responsibility and complexity. No offense, but there's a big difference between classroom theory and real-world practice." Emma was about to respond when the captain's voice came over the intercom system for the standard pre-flight announcement. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Mike Stevens welcoming you aboard Flight 892 with service to Miami. We're expecting a smooth flight today with arrival scheduled for 1:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Flight attendants, please prepare for departure." As the Boeing 737 pushed back from the gate and began its taxi to the runway, Emma opened her aircraft systems manual and began reviewing emergency procedures. It was a study habit she had developed during her flight training, using travel time to reinforce her knowledge and stay current on procedures. Robert glanced over at her textbook and chuckled again. "Studying on vacation? You college kids work way too hard. You should just relax and enjoy the flight experience. Look out the window, watch a movie, take a nap. Leave the flying to the professionals up front." "I enjoy studying aviation," Emma replied. "It helps me understand what's happening during the flight and appreciate the complexity of commercial operations." Dr. Mitchell leaned over from the window seat. "That's very dedicated of you, Emma. Though I hope you're planning to have some fun in Miami too. All work and no play, as they say. You young people need to enjoy yourselves while you can." Emma smiled and continued reading. Her textbook was open to a chapter on Boeing 737 hydraulic systems, complete with detailed diagrams showing the location of pumps, reservoirs, and backup systems. She knew that this specific aircraft had 3 independent hydraulic systems that controlled flight surfaces, landing gear, and brakes. She could identify the switches and circuit breakers that controlled each system and understood the procedures for handling hydraulic failures. To the adults sitting next to her, she was just a college student reading a textbook. They had no idea that she possessed more technical knowledge about their aircraft than most passengers would acquire in a lifetime of flying. The takeoff from Denver was smooth and routine. Emma felt the familiar sensation of acceleration as the engine spooled up to takeoff power, followed by the gentle lift as the aircraft rotated and began its climb toward cruising altitude. She automatically noted the sounds and sensations that indicated normal aircraft operation: the whine of the engines, the hum of the air conditioning system, and the subtle vibrations that meant all systems were functioning properly. As they climbed through 10,000 feet and the seatbelt sign turned off, the flight attendants began their beverage service. Emma ordered coffee and continued studying, occasionally looking out the window to observe the changing landscape below. Her flight training had taught her to always maintain situational awareness, even as a passenger. "You really are dedicated to your studies," Dr. Mitchell observed. "But don't you think you should put the book away and enjoy the view? We're flying over the Rocky Mountains. It's absolutely beautiful." "I am enjoying it," Emma said, glancing out the window. "I can appreciate the scenery and continue learning at the same time." Flying has taught me to multitask and maintain awareness of multiple things simultaneously. Robert laughed. Flying? You mean those little trainer planes? That's cute, but it's hardly the same as what these professional pilots are doing up front. When you're actually responsible for an aircraft this size, with this many people aboard, the pressure is incredible. It takes years of experience to develop that kind of skill and judgment. Emma was tempted to mention her 340 hours of flight time, including several emergency scenarios she had successfully handled, but she had learned that adults often dismissed student accomplishments as insignificant compared to real, professional experience. Instead, she simply nodded and returned to her textbook. Up in the cockpit, Captain Mike Stevens and First Officer Jennifer Walsh were maintaining their normal flight operations as the aircraft cruised at 37,000 feet. Stevens, a 25-year veteran with over 20,000 flight hours, was feeling slightly under the weather but nothing that seemed serious enough to affect his flying ability. He had eaten breakfast at the hotel that morning, scrambled eggs, bacon, and toast that had tasted a bit off, but hotel food was often disappointing. Stevens had been flying commercially for most of his adult life, starting as a flight instructor after college, then working his way up through regional airlines before joining a major carrier. He had seen every type of weather, handled numerous mechanical problems, and dealt with medical emergencies involving passengers. He prided himself on his professionalism and his ability to handle any situation that might arise during flight operations. First Officer Walsh was newer to commercial aviation, with 3,200 flight hours and 8 months of experience on the Boeing 737. She had earned her commercial license through a university aviation program similar to Emma's, though at a different school. Her training had been thorough and comprehensive, but she was still building the real-world experience that came only from regular flight operations. As Flight 892 continued eastward across the country, Captain Stevens began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. What had started as mild nausea was developing into something more serious. His stomach was cramping and he was beginning to feel dizzy and weak. The breakfast he had eaten was clearly not sitting well, and the symptoms were getting worse rather than better. "Jennifer, I'm starting to feel pretty sick," Stevens told his first officer. "I think that hotel breakfast gave me food poisoning. Do you want me to call the flight attendants for some medicine?" Walsh asked, noticing that her captain looked pale and was starting to sweat. "That might be a good idea," Stevens replied, but even as he spoke, the symptoms were intensifying. He could feel his concentration slipping, and his hands were starting to shake slightly. The senior flight attendant, Mark Johnson, responded quickly to the cockpit call and brought a first aid kit along with some anti-nausea medication. But it was clear that Captain Stevens was getting worse, not better. Within minutes, he was doubled over with severe abdominal cramps and was vomiting into an airsick bag. "I can't continue flying," Stevens managed to say between waves of nausea. "You need to take command of the aircraft. I'm too sick to maintain control." The word sent a chill through First Officer Walsh. While she had trained for pilot incapacitation scenarios, she had never actually faced the reality of being the sole qualified pilot on a commercial airliner with 156 passengers and crew members. The weight of responsibility was enormous and terrifying. "Denver Center, Flight 892, Walsh radioed to air traffic control. We have a pilot medical emergency. Captain is incapacitated due to severe illness. First officer assuming command of aircraft. Flight 892, Denver Center copies your emergency. What is the nature of the pilot's condition and do you require immediate assistance?" "Captain appears to have severe food poisoning and is unable to perform flight duties," Walsh replied, working to keep her voice professional despite her rising anxiety. "I'm continuing toward Miami unless you recommend otherwise. Request priority handling and medical assistance standing by upon arrival. Flight 892, you have priority handling. Be advised weather shows developing thunderstorms along your route. Do you require any additional assistance?" Walsh's heart sank as she looked at the weather radar display. A line of severe thunderstorms was developing directly across their planned route to Miami. The storms showed intense precipitation and turbulence that would require experienced decision-making and precise flying skills to navigate safely. She had encountered thunderstorms before, but always with an experienced captain providing guidance and backup. The thought of handling severe weather alone while responsible for so many lives was overwhelming. She needed help, but there were no other qualified pilots on the flight crew. Captain Stevens was now completely incapacitated, slumped in his seat and barely conscious. Mark Johnson was doing his best to make Stevens comfortable, but it was obvious that the captain would not be able to provide any assistance for the remainder of the flight. "Is there anything I can do to help you?" Johnson asked Walsh, seeing the stress and fear in her eyes. "I need another pilot," Walsh said bluntly. "Someone with experience who can help me navigate through this weather and complete a safe approach and landing. Do we have any deadheading crew members on board today?" Johnson quickly checked the passenger manifest on his tablet. "No off-duty crew members on this flight. But I could make an announcement asking if there are any qualified pilots among the passengers. Sometimes we get lucky and have someone traveling who can assist in situations like this." Walsh nodded, knowing it was their only option. While the announcement would certainly alarm the passengers, she desperately needed help from someone with aviation knowledge and experience. Even a recently retired pilot or flight instructor would be better than trying to handle the situation completely alone. "Make the announcement," Walsh decided. "At this point, I'll take any qualified help I can get." Johnson returned to the cabin, his mind racing as he thought about how to word the announcement. He needed to be honest about the seriousness of the situation without creating panic among the passengers. During his 15 years as a flight attendant, he had made thousands of routine announcements, but never anything like this. In the cabin, most passengers were unaware of the developing crisis in the cockpit. Some were sleeping, others were reading or watching movies on their personal devices, and a few were working on laptops. Emma was still studying her aircraft systems manual, reviewing the section on electrical system failures and backup procedures. The atmosphere in the cabin was calm and routine until Johnson picked up the intercom microphone and his voice filled the aircraft. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your senior flight attendant Mark Johnson speaking. I need to inform you of an important situation. We have encountered a medical emergency in the cockpit. Our captain has become seriously ill and is unable to continue his flight duties. Our first officer, who is fully qualified and capable, is now piloting the aircraft." A murmur of concern rippled through the cabin as passengers began to understand the implications of what they were hearing. "However," Johnson continued, "we are also encountering some challenging weather conditions along our route, and our first officer would greatly benefit from assistance by anyone with pilot training or significant aviation experience. If you are a licensed pilot, flight instructor, aviation mechanic, or have substantial knowledge of aircraft operations, please press your call button immediately so we can speak with you." The reaction in the cabin was immediate and varied. Some passengers looked around nervously, expecting to see other travelers raise their hands or press call buttons. Others reached for their phones, forgetting they had no cellular service at cruising altitude. A few people began whispering anxiously to their companions about what the announcement might mean for their safety. Emma felt her heart rate increase as she processed what she had just heard. The captain was incapacitated, the first officer was flying alone, and they were facing severe weather conditions. They needed help from someone with aviation knowledge. She looked around the cabin, waiting to see who would respond to the call for assistance. Surely there must be other pilots or aviation professionals on board. In a cabin with 156 passengers, the odds seemed good that someone would have relevant experience. But as the seconds ticked by and no call buttons were pressed, Emma began to realize that she might be the only person on the aircraft with any aviation training at all. The thought was both terrifying and compelling. Robert, the businessman sitting next to her, shook his head in disbelief. "This is unbelievable. How can a major airline not have backup pilots available? We're going to be in serious trouble if they can't find someone qualified to help. A first officer alone can't handle severe weather with a plane full of passengers." Dr. Mitchell leaned forward from her window seat, her voice filled with concern. "Maybe there's an off-duty pilot somewhere on the plane who just hasn't heard the announcement yet. Or perhaps someone retired from aviation. These things usually work out somehow." Emma's hand moved slowly toward her call button, then hesitated. Would anyone take her seriously? She was just a college student with a textbook. She didn't have thousands of hours of commercial experience or an airline transport pilot license. Her training was mostly in small aircraft and flight simulators. But as she thought more carefully about her background, Emma realized she might actually know more about Boeing 737 systems than most pilots who flew other aircraft types. Her university program had been specifically designed around 737 operations because it was the most common commercial aircraft in the world. She had spent over 200 hours in 737 simulators, practicing everything from routine operations to complex emergency scenarios. More importantly, she understood that First Officer Walsh was probably feeling overwhelmed and scared right now. Sometimes having another person in the cockpit, even a student pilot, could make the difference between success and disaster. An extra pair of trained eyes, someone to help run checklists and monitor systems, could be invaluable in a crisis situation. Emma also knew something that most passengers didn't understand. Modern commercial aircraft were highly automated and designed to be flown safely even in challenging conditions. The key was understanding the systems, following proper procedures, and making good decisions. Her academic training had focused heavily on these exact skills. Taking a deep breath, Emma pressed her call button. Mark Johnson appeared at her row within 30 seconds, looking hopeful but clearly skeptical when he saw how young she was. "Are you a pilot?" he asked quietly, trying not to attract too much attention from other passengers. "I'm a student pilot working toward my commercial license," Emma replied. "I'm majoring in aviation science and aerospace engineering at Colorado State University. I have my private pilot license with 340 hours of flight time, and I've trained extensively on Boeing 737 systems and emergency procedures." Johnson's expression showed mixed feelings. A college student wasn't exactly what they had been hoping for, but she was the only person who had responded to the announcement, and her credentials sounded more substantial than he had expected. "Have you ever flown an aircraft this large?" he asked. "Not a real one, but I've logged over 200 hours in Boeing 737 flight simulators," Emma answered. "I know the systems, the emergency procedures, and the approach and landing techniques. I may not have commercial experience, but I understand how this aircraft operates." Robert and Dr. Mitchell were listening to the conversation with growing amazement and concern. "Wait a minute," Robert interrupted. "You're talking about letting a college student into the cockpit? She's been sitting here reading textbooks the whole flight. This isn't a time for on-the-job training." "Actually, Mr. Chin," Emma said calmly, "I've been reading about the specific systems on this aircraft. I know where every switch and circuit breaker is located, I understand the hydraulic and electrical systems, and I've practiced emergency scenarios that most commercial pilots only encounter in recurrent training." Dr. Mitchell looked worried. "Emma, dear, I'm sure you're very knowledgeable, but this is a life-or-death situation. Don't you think we should wait to see if someone with more experience comes forward?" "No one else has responded," Emma pointed out. "And every minute we wait is a minute closer to that severe weather the first officer mentioned. If I can help, even in a small way, isn't that better than having her handle everything alone?" Johnson made a decision. "Let me talk to the first officer and see what she thinks. If she believes you can be helpful, then we'll give it a try. But I need to be honest, if this doesn't work out, we'll have to ask you to return to your seat." "I understand," Emma said, already unbuckling her seatbelt. "But I want to help if I can." As Emma stood up to follow Johnson toward the cockpit, the reaction from other passengers was immediate and mixed. Some looked at her with newfound respect, finally understanding that her studies were more serious and practical than they had assumed. Others appeared worried about entrusting their lives to someone so young and seemingly inexperienced. "Good luck," called out a passenger from across the aisle. "We're all counting on you." "Are you sure about this?" Robert asked, his business confidence shaken by the unusual situation. "I mean, I still think we should wait for someone with more experience." "Mr. Chin," Emma replied, "sometimes the help you need comes from unexpected places. I may be young, but I'm trained, I'm prepared, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes to help get everyone home safely." As she walked toward the front of the aircraft, Emma could hear passengers whispering behind her. Some conversations were supportive, others skeptical, but all reflected the extraordinary nature of the situation. A college student was about to enter the cockpit of a commercial airliner to help deal with a life-threatening emergency. When Johnson opened the cockpit door, Emma got her first look at the real-world crisis she had only practiced in simulators. Captain Stevens was slumped in the left seat, clearly incapacitated, while First Officer Walsh was gripping the controls with obvious tension and stress. "This is Emma Rodriguez," Johnson announced. "She's a student pilot with Boeing 737 simulator experience and knowledge of aircraft systems." Walsh looked up at Emma with a mixture of hope and desperation. "I have to be completely honest, I was hoping for someone with thousands of hours of commercial experience. But you're what we have, and I need all the help I can get. Can you actually assist with aircraft operations?" "Yes, I can," Emma replied confidently, taking the observer seat behind the pilots. "I know these systems, I understand emergency procedures, and I've practiced scenarios like this in the simulator." "What's our current situation?" Walsh quickly briefed Emma on their status. About 90 minutes remaining to Miami, severe thunderstorms blocking their approach path, and a first officer who had never handled weather this challenging while acting as pilot in command. Emma studied the weather radar display and the flight management system, quickly analyzing their options. "The storm line looks like it's moving eastward toward the coast. If we request a slight course deviation and adjust our arrival timing, we might be able to approach Miami after the worst of the weather moves offshore. Are you sure about that? Walsh asked. Weather prediction is complex, and if we guess wrong, we could end up in worse conditions. I've studied meteorology extensively, Emma replied. These convective systems follow predictable patterns based on upper-level winds and surface heating. The radar shows the storm movement clearly, and I'm confident we can time our approach to avoid the worst conditions. For the first time since the emergency began, Walsh felt a glimmer of hope and confidence. This young woman might lack commercial flying experience, but her knowledge was impressive and her calm analytical approach was exactly what Walsh needed. Working together, Emma and Walsh developed a plan to navigate around the worst weather while maintaining adequate fuel reserves for their approach to Miami. Emma's fresh perspective and systematic thinking complemented Walsh's flying skills and operational experience. As Flight 892 began its descent toward Miami, with Emma helping to manage checklists and monitor systems, the collaboration between the experienced first officer and the knowledgeable student proved to be exactly what the situation required. Miami approach, Flight 892, Walsh radioed as they prepared for their approach. We're ready for vectors to the airport. Be advised we have pilot incapacitation and are being assisted by a qualified student pilot passenger. Flight 892 Miami approach. We have emergency equipment standing by. Current weather shows improving conditions with breaks in the storm line. You're cleared for approach to runway 8 right. Emma continued to support Walsh through the approach phase, calling out airspeeds and altitudes while monitoring the aircraft's systems. Her simulator training had prepared her for exactly this type of scenario, and she felt confident in her ability to help complete a safe landing. As the Boeing 737 touched down smoothly at Miami International Airport, the cabin erupted in applause and cheers. Emma had helped save 156 lives by using her academic knowledge, training, and determination to overcome the initial skepticism of adults who had dismissed her as just another college student. The emergency vehicles met the aircraft at the gate, and Captain Stevens was quickly transported to the hospital where he made a full recovery from his severe food poisoning. First Officer Walsh was commended by the airline for her professionalism under pressure, and Emma became a media sensation as the story spread about how a college student had helped land a commercial airliner. In the days following the incident, Emma received calls from major airlines interested in fast-tracking her to commercial pilot positions. Her university program gained national recognition, and aviation schools around the country saw increased enrollment from students inspired by her example. But perhaps most importantly, Emma had proven to herself and others that age and experience, while valuable, were not the only qualifications that mattered in aviation. Education, training, preparation, and the courage to act when help was needed could be just as important in determining the outcome of an emergency situation. Robert Chin approached Emma as they waited for their luggage in Miami. "I owe you a sincere apology," he said. "When I saw you studying that textbook, I thought you were just playing at being a pilot. I had no idea that your education could actually save our lives. You've taught me never to judge someone's capabilities based on their age or appearance." Dr. Mitchell also sought out Emma before leaving the airport. "You've shown me that students today are far more capable and prepared than I had realized. Your knowledge and courage were inspiring. I'll never again assume that classroom learning can't have real-world applications." As Emma finally headed toward the baggage claim to collect her belongings and continue with her spring break plans, she reflected on how the experience had changed her perspective on her education and future career. She had always believed in the value of her aviation studies, but now she had proof that academic preparation could make the difference between life and death in real-world situations. The incident had also taught her that expertise and leadership could emerge from unexpected sources during emergencies. Age, experience, and credentials were important, but they weren't the only factors that determined someone's ability to contribute meaningfully in a crisis. From that day forward, Emma never again doubted the practical value of her education or her potential to make a significant contribution to aviation safety. She had learned that when lives were on the line, what mattered most was knowledge, preparation, and the willingness to step forward and help when help was desperately needed. The story of Flight 892 became a case study in aviation training programs, demonstrating how proper education and simulator training could prepare even student pilots to assist in real-world emergencies. Emma's experience proved that learning combined with courage could overcome any challenge regardless of age or experience level, and that sometimes the most unexpected person could become the hero everyone needed.